document about the 1998 Benevolent Assimilation Proclamation of the United States in the Philippines was written by William McKinley. He was the 25th President of the United States, serving from March 4, 1897 until his assassination on September 14, 1901, after leading the nation to victory in the Spanish-American War and raising protective tariffs to promote American industry. The war against Spain and the pressure of public opinion forced McKinley into the war that made the United States an international power. The United States destroyed the Spanish fleet outside Santiago Harbor in Cuba, seized Manila in the Philippines, and occupied Puerto Rico. He said that American occupation was necessary to uplift and Christianize the Filipinos.
Now let's take a look back at the history behind the proclamation of the former President of the United States, President McKinley. It was on December 21, 1898 when President McKinley issued the Benevolent Assimilation Proclamation, which stated that the military government in Manila would be extending to the whole island of the Philippines and that the United States government succeeds the sovereignty of the Spanish government over the Philippines. Proclamation occurred, the United States had conquered Spain during the Battle of Manila Bay on May 1, 1898. It ultimately weakened the Spanish forces from town to town, and city after city fell in the hands of the Philippines with the help of the U.S. The hopelessness of the Spaniards led them to offer a secret agreement to the United States, which said that America would take over Manila and Filipinos would take no part of it. After a few months, the United States signed a treaty with the Spaniards in Paris on December 10, 1898 without the Filipinos' notice. One of the agreement's conditions was that Spain would surrender the Philippines to the United States for $20 million. Again, the Treaty of Paris was secretive and Filipinos didn't know everything about it. So, it's like there was a betrayal in the alliance of the Filipinos and Americans. This proclamation happened after the signing of the treaty. Emilio Aguinaldo received the proclamation with the help of General Elwell Otis, a U.S. military commander and governor-general in the Philippines. Otis sent Emilio Aguinaldo a version of the proclamation that he had edited. He removed some parts that would offend Filipinos and replaced those phrases with a sugar-coated one. However, the unaltered version eventually made its way to Aguinaldo. And Aguinaldo issued a counter-proclamation exposing the intended takeover of the Americans, which later eventually led to a war between the U.S. and the Philippines.
The Benevolent Assimilation Proclamation is a primary account that highlights the promises and future plans of the United States and how they will take control over the Philippines after the American forces defeated the Spaniards in their colonization in the land of the Philippines. In the beginning of the said document, the content focuses on how the Americans managed to overthrow the Spanish regime in the Philippines and eventually proceeded to state the processes of maintaining their relationship with the Filipinos during their rule. It is stated there that the Americans are not here to invade nor initiate a war from the Filipinos, but rather give them support and protection as a token of friendship. They intend to protect the natives with their rights, give them benefits, and especially respect. It was also discussed in the text that in order to establish a new political power, the authority and supremacy will be granted to the United States in order to create a well-built cooperation from both of the countries.
It is
also included in the document that it became easy for the US to get the trust of our authorities for the reason of they gave an assurance that they will be the protectant of our country. And most especially, they are doing it for the inheritance of free people. After what happened in martial law, or so what we call the dark times, the US also stated that we must have a proper guidance in following the law and that there must be a strong army of authority that will maintain the rules. What US wants was to help Philippines to have a stable system and functionable rules, which we can relay on to have an obedient or proper society. They aim to provide help on how to correctly run a government with a clean system that assists people to know and to have their rights in the said society. While it is obvious that the document is all about the Americans' point of view in governing the Philippines by their laws and preferences, perhaps the intention of the document was to make people aware of how the United States helped Filipino people back in the days. Although they said that proclaim in the most public manner that we come not as invaders or conquerors, but as friends. They intended to be friends with Philippines, and they even helped the authorities to have an effective law. Perchance, there are some intents that are not willingly done by the US, and which is needed to give in return of their service. Maybe it is to take advantage of the country they help. Mayhap, there are some good intentions, but part of it. But then again, what they intended to do will never be cured. I can say that they wanted to help our country for an additional power. We cannot rival the partnership because we have a huge debt in the said country, and the only thing we can do is to cope with what they wanted us to do, and which is the authorities must follow what they suggest on how to rule the society, so that we can maintain what we call peace for both sides.
The contribution to the general narrative of the Philippine history of the Proclamation of the Benevolent Assimilation of the United States in the Philippines in the year 1898 is a primary account that gives us a glimpse of what happened after the Americans managed to defeat the Spaniards in colonizing the Philippines and the plans they constructed during their reign in the country on how they would manage and build a great relationship with the locals, and sees to it that they do not intend to start a war, but rather offer the Philippines a friendship to create an equal and just ruling. It also summarizes the huge impact that the Americans left to the Filipinos, which made us who we are today.
As the United States took over the Philippines as a ceded territory, a new political power was established by the authority of the United States. With this, laws after laws were brought to the Filipino people. And according to William McKinley, they came as friends to protect the natives in their homes, in their employments, and in their personal and religious beliefs, and that the people have nothing to worry or be afraid of. As Philippines was within the absolute domain of military authority, everyone was asked to cooperate and submit to the government of the United States. And as William McKinley were known as the advance agent of prosperity who raises tariffs to promote the American industry, he also practiced and implemented the taxes and duties heretofore payable by the people to the late government.
I believe that it is important to have an united relationship with other countries, not just for the reason that we can have benefits from them. Rather, we want to have an equality for world peace, so that what happened in the past may not happen in future.
By reading and analyzing the document about the 1898 Benevolent Assimilation Proclamation of the United States in the Philippines, I became more knowledgeable about the history of the relationship between America and the Philippines, and how the events that happened in the past shaped both of the countries and who they finally are today in the 21st century. I would often hear from the perspective of others that the Philippines and America has a love-hate relationship from each other, which doesn't really make sense to me before having the knowledge about the past events that the both countries have shared.
As I have analyzed the 1898 Benevolent Assimilation Proclamation, I realized that the Philippines have never been unchained from the imprisonment and enslavement of the colonizers. Thus, it urged our Filipino heroes to fight for our independence eagerly. And as a citizen of the Philippines, I am passionate to learn more about the history of our country.
After reading the 1998 Benevolent Assimilation Proclamation, I realized that freedom was never given to us by the colonizers. We had been passed from colonizer to colonizers that have promised that they will be giving us freedom if we cooperate and submit. But all they did was abuse us, made use of what was ours, steal from us, then afterward pass us to other colonizers. The life before for the Filipinos was sad and hopeless. All they did was hope for a better tomorrow, but all they received were mistreatment, enslavement, abuse, and immoralities from the colonizers.
After reading the material that was provided, what I have learned was, even if there were some misunderstandings and perhaps both sides used to use each other, there are many things that were enhanced for the past decades. And if the Philippines was still in touch with the opponent side, the type of governing in here nowadays may have still be the same of how it was governed before. There are a lot of bright ideas and very organized thoughts that they contributed for the betterment of our country. But sadly, to think that prior to how authorities ruled the nation, even if there were corruptions before happened, they are still doing their role, which is to do good for the people. We cannot deny that. Unlike nowadays, we have authorities, but they only think for themselves or care for themselves and not for the people which they should be serving. And to wrap it all up, even though the love and hate between the two countries have ended, their help during the trying times had the biggest impact that is written in our history. There are a lot of contributions from the US that were taught to our past officials on how they will be able to assist or govern us. The learnings will still continue and will enlighten us to fully understand what happened and how Philippines achieved freedom. That is it for our presentation. We are Group 10. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful and blessed morning.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas. Kayang maging